Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Demai Pedek Halacha Beis. We're going to be learning Daf Mem Gimel. We're going to go back to the end of Daf Mem Beis Amid Beis Mamish at the last few words in the line At Kedoin Kohen and Levi. Moving on to Daf Mem Gimel. Just want to review that the last topic we learned in the previous year, as we mentioned, is really subject to a Machlokes Tanoim in Masechtas Git and Daf Lamed. We're speaking about whether the owner, a Yisrael of Tevel, has the right to separate from the Meiser Rishon, the Trumas Meiser, and to determine to which coin to give it to. For sure, the Meiser Rishon he must give to a Levi. The Levi, that's the way the Chachamim learn, only the Levi. They are the Balabatim over the Meiser Rishon, or the coin to whom you also may give the Meiser Rishon becomes the owner over the Meiser Rishon, and it is the owner that has the right and the responsibility to separate Meiser min HaMeiser and to give it to a Kohen. So the Chachamim learn that a Yid that has to give away the Meiser Yishayin may not be the one determining the Trumas Meiser, not the separating of it and not the giving it to whichever recipient the Yisrael owner decides. However, Abba Eliezer ben Gamla or ben Gimel argues with that, whether the pshat in Abba Eliezer is that the Yisrael is the owner of the Meiser Rishon to determine the Trumas Meiser, whether we're going to learn the pshat that he's viewed as the shliach of the Kohen or the Levi. That's a big topic. However, the pshat is halacha actually follows Abba Eliezer ben Gamla. And nevertheless, our sugya, we'll just read the lines again. Our Gemara in Yerushalmi, Dafka does not follow Abba Eliezer ben Gamla, and therefore it makes the observation, just to reread the words, that At Kedoin Kohen Levi, turning to Daf Mem Gimel. However, if the Yid is the one who bought the bread in our Mishnah, that's Tevel, is Ein Yemar Trumas Meiser. He cannot be the one following the prescribed order of the Mishnah, which would mean that he would be the one giving away the Trumas Meiser, because then Nimsa Mafresh al Davar She'ena Sholei, because it's not his to give away. Okay, I just wanted to speak out that the irony that we actually paskin like Abba Eliezer ben Gamla. Now, we mentioned this when we learned Halacha Beis. We mentioned this when we learned Daf Mem Beis. That just a quickly chazir for Yakir, that when a person buys bread that's tevel, that means that this person gave nothing of the separation. The owners gave nothing away. Everything has to be tied. The Truma Gedolah, the Meiser Rishon, the Trumas Meiser, the Meiser Sheni or Meiser Ani, and Chala. So the Mishnah gave a very roundabout order as to exactly what needs to be done. Another parenthesis, just to remind ourselves that even though the Mishnah spoke about 3%, the Braisa explicitly spoke about 5%, and we actually explained that it's 5% plus, okay, because the Braisa clearly is speaking about Chala. In our Mishnah, we have the words Usha or Chala, but many take that out. Doesn't make a difference in the din. But let me just remind everyone and reread the words in the Mishnah on Daf Mem Beis. Let me explain what's happening for people that are just joining right now. You have a loaf of bread from which you have to separate Truma Gedolah. You have to separate Trumas Meiser to give to a Kohen. You also obviously have to separate the Meiser Rishon first, from which to separate the Trumas Meiser. And you have to separate Chala. We're going to follow the sugya that this Seder is Meduyak, Truma Gedolah, Meiser Rishon, Trumas Meiser, Chala, and then Meiser Sheni. So, Pasha, this Perek, the whole Halakech Menanachtoin, whether Halacha Aleph by the Mai, whether Halacha Beis from Tevel, is giving you mamish the seder of how to do it. It's like the bottom line. And the Mishnah began that you have to make a mark on the loaf of bread. Guys, we're going to go with the Braisa. You mark off 5% plus. So let's just say this would be a loaf of bread. So let's say this would represent, this little tip to my right, maybe to your left, represents 5% of the rest. You take a knife and you make a mark. You don't break it off yet, but you make a mark in the loaf of bread. Clearly, big galui, separating, making a distinct mark, separating 5%. I'm saying 5%. I always mean 5% and a bit, 5% and the other 95%. We also learned already that when it says in Parshas Mishpatim, we learned that the taich of Milayos Rashi says is bikurim. The macha is truma. Loisa acher means don't delay, meaning don't separate the truma sumaisras out of the prescribed order. What has to come first really is bikurim. That's way before. But afterwards, from the truma sumaisras, what has to come first is a truma gedoyla. Yet in our Mishnah, you don't first separate the truma gedoyla. You have to first, and these are the words of the Mishnah. You say like this: Echad mimeya mima sheyesh kan. Approximately 1% of what's in the marked area, that will remain the way it is until now. You speak about 1% of the 5%, and you say, oh, this is chulin. Chulin doesn't mean chulin. Everything is tevel. It means this is something that I'm not going to be talking about. And then you say, usha'ar truma alakor. The remainder is truma. The remainder is truma. Now, again, really, when you're speaking about 5%, the remainder is truma and challah. Doesn't matter. That's what you're saying. So,
but Rabbi, how do you give truma and be makte truma that belongs to the coin?
No, that's for sure that the Yisrael, the owner, is the one that has the mitzvah and the responsibility to give the truma to the coin. The owner, the Yisrael, is the one that designates the truma gedoyla, and he gets to pick to which coin to give it to. That's for sure. Okay. But instead of him speaking about the truma, he first says that there is 1% that I'm leaving the way it is. Then he goes and he says, and now the other, in the Mishnah, he marked 3%. The other 2% is truma gedoyla, which is true. Truma is around 1 of 50. Truma is around 2%. And then he goes back to the 1%. And he says, this 1% is my sedition. But we know my sedition is not 1%. So then he has to add this 1% and another 9% that's on the other side of the mark becomes my sedition. And the 1% that I began speaking about, l'chatchila, and I said that it should stay chulin, now this becomes trumas meiser under my sedition. The herst, what this guy is doing, instead of just saying, I marked off 3%, 1 is truma, 2 is truma gedoyla, and 1 is my, and then he goes with the rest. He doesn't do that. He has to first speak about the 1. 1 is remaining the way it is. 1 I'm not talking about. The other 2 is truma gedoyla. The 1 is my sedition together with 9 other parts on the other side of the mark. Now I got 10%. And now the 1 that I spoke about l'chatchila on the right side of the mark, now that becomes trumas meiser. Why are we doing that? That will be the kasha. That will be the bulk of today's daf. And it's mamish gavaldik. It has to be that way. You'll learn this, you'll understand why. And the answer that we'll learn in detail inside is based on a premise. And I know that we are familiar with Pirkei Yavos, right? Rabban Gamliel Omer, Altar Bela Aser Umadois, right? Pay the Christian. That when you give Meiser, whether it's Meiser Rishon, which is what we are talking about, whether it's Meiser Sheni / Meiser Ani, don't give Meiser by approximation. Meiser has to be exact. What we never spoke about, what we'll speak about it right now, is that Truma must be given Mei Oimed. It must be given by approximation. Truma is not allowed to be given precisely. Okay, we're going to learn later reasons for that, not in today's sugya. So look at the irony. Truma has to be given Mei Oimed. Meiser, and by the way, Meiser is not only Meiser Rishon, it's also Meiser Men HaMeiser. The word Meiser is Mei Eser. The word Meiser means 10. Truma means to lift up. Actually, Midai Raisa, you can give one little kernel and it's going to exempt a whole pile from Truma Gedoyla. And even though the Chachamim gave the Shiurim, Echad Marbayim, Echad Mechamishim, Echad Mishishim, it's Mei Oimed. Now, let me tell you the problem over here. Problem is like this, that when it comes to Meiser, what happens if a person doesn't give Meiser Rishon exact as they should have, but they give it by approximation? Before a Tanai Beis Din that we'll learn today about, this is a very important daf, you have yourself a real problem. And it's a real problem, the fact that we have a real problem, because we're not the angels. We even when we do things precise, it's never that precise, which is a problem. So the Chachamim resolved it for us. But let me first tell you theoretically the problem. Think about it. Let's just give numbers. If I have a basket of 100, and forget about Truma Gedoyla, it was given. I have now 100. So you're saying that my sedition means 10, exactly 10. Okay, What happens if I give 9? What happens if I didn't give it exact? So the 9 that I separated is good because it's my sedition. Really, I owe 1 more. The 9 is good. But what remains is a mixture of chulin and tevel, which is a big problem. Why is it a mixture of chulin and tevel? Because 10 was needed to make the rest chulin. If I only gave 9, some in the remaining was not yet ma'ased. That's called tevel. Now it's mixed together. So the remaining is a problem. Let me go in the other direction. What happens if a person didn't give ma'ased exact as they should have? They gave it me'oimed. They gave it by approximation. And what they really did is that they gave 11. I'm just giving a number. Now, when they give 11, the remaining is good. The remaining is chulin. The 11 is a problem. Why is the 11 a problem? Because really only 10 of it is my sedition. Don't forget, the added one is not my sedition because my sedition is exact. Can't say it's chulin. Why is it not chulin? Because that 11 never had Maisa removed from it. The Maisa that you removed was for the remaining. Should have been 90. Now you have 89. It's even worse. So that is tevel. And now you have Maisa Rishon and tevel mixed together. I just want to speak out the challenge of, since you have to give it exact, now to add to everything, don't think that Maisa means numbers. Doesn't mean numbers. It means weight. That really messes everything up. Because let me go back to, I always give the example of apples. Okay, you have 100 apples. And by the way, we all know that according to most of the Shoinim, apples only have to be tied midrabanan. I know that. It doesn't matter. Okay, you have 100 grapes. Let's go with that. There are many more to Shoinim hold that Tiro Shveitzor has to be tied midoirais. It's not, I have to give from every 100 grapes, 10 grapes. No. It's the weight. Problem is that grapes and apples and figs, none of these things are exactly in the same size. So even though I'm going to give exact a number, I don't know whether the weight of what I removed from my sedition is exactly 10% of the remaining. It will always be a little bit more, a little bit less. And now you have a problem. And for that, there's a Tanai Beis Din that is allowed to be used up until a point. We'll learn about the Tanai Beis Din. It's amazing. The Tanai Beis Din is so powerful that many Achronim compare it to the din of Kol HaMakadosh Adata D'Rabbanan Mekadosh, right? Which is a big, in other words, we're making a separation, but we are allowing the Chachamim to make adjustments, which are, wow, like how do they do that? They're doing nothing, but they do everything. Really, there are 2 steps in the Tanai Beis Din. It only functions if a person got near the right amount. They made a human error. If a person from laziness, right, they didn't take off 10 that weighed more, but they took off 15 from 100, then we don't apply the Tanai Beis Din. But all of that is going to be used to explain why the Mishnah gives this very roundabout way of how to separate whether it is the Truma, the Ma'aser Rishon, and the Chala, or let's go that the Mishnah is not talking about Chala, the Truma, the Ma'aser Rishon, the Trumas Ma'aser. We mentioned the Echad, the 1% stays the way it is. I'm going to speak about the other percent. Then you go back to the 1%. Why are we doing it that way? I would like to dedicate today's class Le'ilu Nishmas Chaim Ben Nisan. That's Kevan's brother, whose yahrzeit is today. May his neshama have an aliyah. Okay, so Chavra Daf Mem Gimel. So now that we already reread the top 2 lines, we are starting at the end of the second line from the top of the Amud. Yes. Says the Gemara, the Mishnah. Why does the Mishnah again say, and I'm reading the words of the Mishnah, if you are, for whatever reason, beginning to speak about the Ma'aser Rishon, which is Echad Mimeya, and again, Yakir, Ma'aser Rishon is not Echad Mimeya. You're saying that Echad Mirishon, from what's within the mark, together with 9 other of such parts on the other side of the mark, that becomes 10%, which it does. And now the one in the mark becomes Trumas Ma'aser. If you are mentioning that first, so why did you designate the Ma'aser Rishon and Trumas Ma'aser? Says the Gemara that if Ma'aser v'achar kach Truma, if you would mamish not only speak about the one that you're going to use later, if you're going to speak about this one and 9 parts are Ma'aser Rishon, etc., if you would do that you can't do. Why? Because Nimtza Magdim, because you would be separating Ma'aser preceding Truma Gedoyla. And as we just mentioned in the last year, Loisa acher, because a pasuk in Parshas Mishpatim, mileyascha v'dimacher loisa acher, not the loisa acher by korbanos. We said that. So it's a separate pasuk. This pasuk is telling us that we have to give the trumas umaisis following the prescribed order. And the prescribed order, I know that there are things that come before truma gedolah. That's bikurim. We're not talking about bikurim. That by truma umaisis, what comes first is truma gedolah. Has to be that way. Okay, so then why don't you separate the truma? You marked off the 3% plus, 3% plus, really. But let's speak about the 3%, right? If we're only focusing on the truma and the trumas meiser, so truma, first speak about the 2%, and then the 3% within the mark, that 1 and 9 to the sides are meiser rishon, and the 1 within the mark now becomes trumas meiser on the meiser rishon. Why wouldn't you do it that way? Truma v'charkach ma'aser. If you would do it normal, then you would have a problem. What would be the problem? Nimtza, because if you'll do it that way, then your meiseris won't be exact. Your meiseris won't be exact. Why won't your meiseris be exact? Guys, we already spoke about this. I'll tell you why. Because meiser rishon, my friends, is not 10% from what you began out with. Right? If you did things really properly, the bikurim was designated and separated way before you made the meruach, way before the iyas b'nei abayis. The bikurim was already actually separated when it began to grow. But now that you gathered your produce and it had its gemar malach, whether meruach is enough, whether you need to have the echad meshisha dvarim midoiraisa, the one of them we just learned this in the Rambam is the iyas b'nei abayis. Now that you're chayiv, now that you triggered the obligation. Let me go to my number 100. If you have 100 apples, so meiser rishon is not 10. It's not 10. You know what meiser rishon is? Meiser rishon is 10% from what remains after truma gedolah. Truma gedolah dafka does not have to be precise. But I just want to, for the record, if you were to take off exactly 2%, which is the echad mechamishin for truma gedolah, let's say every apple has the same weight. So from the 100, now you have 98. Meiser rishon would be 9.8. And the trumas meiser would be 0.98, not 1%. You see what's happening over here, first of all? Now you're speaking about percentages. And let's speak that the 1% in the Mishnah means the 0.98. You need for this 0.98 to be bidiyuk, exact. So what you're doing in our Mishnah is that you are designating. You're designating the 0.98 before you begin. It's whatever percent, whatever number you know you will end up needing to give for meiser rishon / trumas meiser. You dafka need to first separate that out. You're not designating it yet. You have to separate it out because that number has to be exact. The remainder can be approximate. And if you're going to begin by saying, I'm giving 2%, you made a mark. Then you're saying that you're giving 2% within the mark to Truma Gedolah. What remains won't be exact. It will not be exact. It doesn't work that way. Shirayim is never exact. When you have to give something precise, right, you make the first precision in the beginning. Because if you're going to use that which needs to be precise from what remains, who says what remains will be exactly what you need? It might be a little bit more, might be a little bit less. And like we explained in the words of introduction, more or less is a problem. Before the Tanai Beis Din. So Nimsa, if you're going to begin with Truma Gedolah, and then whatever remains within the mark, you're saying will become part of Meiser Rishon, ultimately the Trumas Meiser from Meiser Rishon. You know what will happen? Nimsa, oy poiches mi Meiser Rishon, oy moisev al Meiser Rishon. Kahadod the Tani, like we learned in a Braisa, that if a person de facto was a poiches mi Meiser Rishon, right, which means that you gave, instead of 10 from 100, let's say you gave 9. So, and as we explained that you gave 9 instead of 10, you gave less Meiser Rishon. So the Meiser Rishon itself is good because that needed to be separated really and more, but that's good. But the problem is, even though Masreis of Misukanim, but since you didn't separate exactly the right amount, the remaining is Mikol Kolim. Mikol Kolim means it's ruined. Why is it ruined? Because it's a mixture of Chulin and Tevel. Or, same thing in the other direction, that Hama'adiv al Masreis, instead of giving 10 from 100, which you have to, you give, let's say, 11. So even though the remaining 89 is good, but that 11 is not good. Because that 11 is not all Ma'aser Rishon. You cannot add to the Ma'aser Rishon. Now, all of this is Gavaldik, that when it comes to Truma, we could add, we could subtract. I don't need Truma Gedolah to be precise. So that's a big cloud, that if the Mishnah tells you have to mark 3%, or in the Braisa, you have to mark 5%, what you need to first deal with is the Ma'aser, not the Truma. Because since Ma'aser has to be whatever that exact number will be, speak about that first. Say the number that I need for the Ma'aser, I'm leaving now the way it is. The remaining, Taka might be a little bit more than 2%. Taka might be a little bit less than 2%. Adarabah, that's Gavaldik. Because when you Ma'aser Ma'asreisov, then Ma'asreisov Amikol column. In the 11th, 10 is Ma'aser Rishon. The 11th, you can't say is Chulin, because that 11th is not with the Chulin. That 11th you took off, calling it Ma'aser Rishon. That statement is nonsensical. That 11th is not Ma'aser Rishon. Nor did it have Ma'aser Rishon removed from it, because you didn't leave it in the Shirayim. You took it with the Ma'aser Rishon. That really is Tevel. So now you're giving a Levi, not good, bad. You're giving a Ma'aser Rishon and Tevel, even though the Peres of a Misukanim. And the only solution would be, it's how do I make sure that from the demarked area, the correct amount is going to be left as Ma'aser Rishon / Trumas Ma'aser, is by speaking about it first. You're not separating it first. That's Loisa Acher. You're separating Truma Gedolah first. But you're making a mark because at the end of the day, you're going to cut off the marked area, and that will go to the Kohen. You have the right to give it to the Kohen. But you have to, what are you giving to the Kohen? Both the Truma and the Trumas Ma'aser. All right, the Trumas Ma'aser part, that's what we began our share today. That only works according to Abba Eliezer. Anyone can give it. According to the way the Gemara is saying in Yerushalmi here, it happens to speak about that. Who bought the bread? A Kohen or a Levi? A Kohen or a Levi, they separate the Ma'aser Rishon. Not only do they separate Truma Gedolah, they separate Ma'aser Rishon, they separate the Trumas Ma'aser, because they themselves are a Kohen or a Levi. They get to do that. So it doesn't matter whichever Tana the Mishnah is following. That's the only right way of doing it. This is Gavaldik. Okay, and in other words, like this, by going this roundabout way, you accomplish all of your goals. Number one, you dafke designated Truma by estimation. Your mark was exact. Let's say you hit the 3%, you hit the 5%. Gavaldik, good for you. The Truma was designated by estimation. The Trumas Ma'aser will be precise. Trumas Ma'aser is the precise from the Ma'aser Rishon that's precise. And you designated the Truma before you designated the Ma'aser Rishon and the Trumas Ma'aser. This is Gavaldik. That's the reason why we go around in this roundabout way. And I want you to know that's what we do nowadays. I know that there's emendations to this Mishnah, but for people who live in the Eretz Yisrael, and instead of them buying already tithed produce, which is what's very common, but if they do it on their own, I mean, I know that there's a switch, there's a little bit of an addition that they made, but that's more or less the seder of exactly what has to be done. The marking off and the declarations and the separations is done the way it's done. Okay, now we're going to go to Daf Mem Gimel Amud Beis. And now the Gemara is going to have to address, like we explained, a practical problem. I accept. Truma must be given Mei Oimed, Dafke. We don't want to give it precise. Ma'aser Rishon / Trumas Ma'aser may not be given by estimation. I mean, the Gemara doesn't say these words, but that's my problem. My problem is that I'm never going to give exactly 10%. And either way, I'm going to give either more or less. And either the Levi is going to get payers that are Mikul Kolim, there's Tevel in there, or the Shirayim that I will keep as the owner will be Mikul Kolim. What do we do for that? So for that, Omar Rabbi Yosi, I want you to know that that really you have to do everything to the best of your ability. But at the end of the day, you will get to rely on the following Tanai Bezdin. What will be the Tanai Bezdin? Mal Tanai Bezdin, really there are two levels, there's two steps to it. Step number one is First of all, before we say what they are, the Gemara wants to say, when do we apply it? We only apply the Tanai based in ad mokim shahadas noit. Only if you're off from the exactitude was something that a human being will reasonably be off with. In other words, if the person who did the separation is grossly off the mark of give exactly 10%, that person he won't be covered by the Tanai Basin. The Tanai Basin is not for someone who is in violation of the rule of Al Tarbala Asaru Madis. We're speaking about someone who gets that. Truma Dafka estimation, around 2%. My sedition is exactly from what remains 10%. Exactly, there's a Tanai Basin. Now, Rabbi Yechanan, now how does it work? What exactly is the Tanai Basin? And now Rabbi Yechanan will, in between the lines, explain something that we mentioned, but we never explained why. That what we mentioned up until now is that prior to you doing the actual separation, you make a designation. We learned about this 2 weeks ago. We learned just about this in the Rambam. We actually learned, just as an example, that what is Asan Midrabanan to do on Shabbos and on Yom Tov is to make the designation, which is the halachic giving of the maises. The actual physical separation is a technical step you have to do, but it's of much lesser significance. You have to do it just to take it and to give it. But the iked is to make a designation, a verbal designation. When you make a verbal designation that here there is Truma Gedoyla, here there is Ma'aser Rishon, we keep on speaking that you're Kivei Amakim. Or Kivei Amakim means that you declare that in the northern part of the pile, top north of the bag, that's where there's Truma Gedoyla. And the top left, that's where there is Ma'aser Rishon. Why are you Kivei Amakim? Now you'll understand why you're Kivei Amakim. You're Kivei Amakim because the Beis Din will either take away from what you designated if you gave too much, or they're going to add to what you gave if you gave too little. If I gave too little, right, like we mentioned, the maisid is good, but everything else is makukal. They're actually going to, based on themselves, will designate more. Now, if I separated the maisid edition adjacent to the Truma Gedoyla, how are they adding? What they want to add is already Truma Gedoyla. So that's why you dafka designate the makim of the Truma Gedoyla b'tzafay and the maisid edition b'darim, or the other way around. Don't forget, Truma Gedoyla has to be mentioned first. It has to be separated first. But the locations in the pile, in the box, in the bag will be separately. Amar Rabbi Yechanan, Kidei sheyeh keveya ma'aser rishon b'tzvaynai gevaldik, or ma'aser sheni l'draymai. Don't forget, there's one other ma'aser that we it's the same concept. After ma'aser rishon, you give, let's say, in the years, the first, second, the third, the fourth, and the fifth ma'aser sheni. If I'm going to give too little ma'aser rishon, same idea. So then the Beis Din will add to it from what's adjacent to it. But if what adjacent to it, I'm going to give as ma'aser sheni, I got a problem. So every designation is in a different location. Ma'aser sheni l'draymai. Now that ma'aser sheni is in another part, let's go back to the ma'aser rishon. Ma'aser rishon was b'tzafayin. Utrumas ma'aser is b'tzvayn. Now it's amazing that they have that power. Now there is an issue of, will the Levi actually get, guys? The Truma Gedoyla is never a problem, right? The Truma Gedoyla is by estimation. The ma'aser rishon is a problem. Now it's going to come out sometimes that if I by accident gave too little ma'aser rishon, right? So then the Chachamim will be what? They'll be giving more ma'aser rishon to the Levi, which is great. I might not end up giving it to the Levi, which is a problem, but I'm doing the best that I could. But at least I'm not even tevel. And from where are they adding the extra that I, by mistake, by human mistake, did not give adjacent to the ma'aser rishon? So therefore, the ma'aser sheni that I'll be a kerei Hashem will be in a different makom inside the bag itself. Now there's another step to the Tanai Basin. Mahu Tanai Basin, who, not that we are explaining the first, but the way the Noisei Kalim say, look inside, let's say for the Pnei Moshe, 4 or 5 lines under the Gemara, and the medium-sized lines, Mahu Tanai Basin, Umau Oi Tanai Basin, there's another issue that we have to deal with. And that is that after you designate the Meiser Sheni, you have to redeem it. There's a mitzvah to redeem it. I mean, of course, you can take it, but de facto, most people would redeem it. I, by my human mistake, let's say I separated as Meiser Sheni, I think there's 8 Meiser Sheni. Let's say that really there should be a little bit more than 8 for Meiser Sheni. Here, you know what the Beis Din says? The Beis Din says that the money that I designated, and by the way, if I'm the owner, I have to know how to choimish, but the money that I designated for the 8 should pay for the 8 and a bit. In other words, the monies that I'm using, they're changing the price. That's the way they'll do it over there. When it comes to solving the Meiser Rishon, they have to actually add to the Meiser Rishon. They have to subtract from the Meiser Rishon to make sure that either the Levi or the Yisrael, they don't have a mixture. I get that. When it comes to the Pidyon, they made another tonight. It's similar, but it's another tonight. They're not adding or subtracting from the actual produce, but they're saying that the money that I'm giving as Pidyon, Meiser Sheni, even though I'm giving it for what I think is 8, maybe I have too little. Maybe I have too much. They made an adjustment. So now the money will cover whatever the adjustment is. And now that's going back to Rabbi Yochanan. All of that works because a person is koivei amakoim. So therefore, Meiser Rishon and Meiser Sheni are 2 different parts. They have the luxury to say you think you're giving this amount of the Meiser Rishon. It's a little bit more. It's a little bit less. And they're not eating into the Meiser Sheni. And now the Gemara is going to say, Ad kedoin biyavish. The concept of being koivei amakoim works when you're giving it from something that's dry. And therefore, the Meiser Rishon that you first spoke about, that's, let's say, bit safain, that was the example that he gave, right, is completely bit safain. None of the rest is mixing with it. The Meiser Sheni bedarim is fully bedarim. But what about belach? That's the kasha. If you are giving Meiser Rishon and Meiser Sheni from a liquid, let's say from wine, let's say from oil, being koivei amakim l'chora is not enough because it's a mixture. It's all mixed together. And the Gemara doesn't give an answer. What's amazing is that Mara Fulda, and this is something that we have so often in the Yerushalmi, don't misunderstand the non-answer. In Yerushalmi, many non-answers are so obvious you don't have to give an answer. And look inside the Mara Fulda. We're going mamish to the 3rd to last line for the Ava Balach, 2nd to last line in the Amid. The Gemara is asking, B'yayin B'shem and Heiche Yaser. And even though V'loy Mishan al Zeh Klum, the Gemara doesn't have to answer because the Hasan Nami, Yachol Lishtois al Smach Shianiach Levasoy. What really has to happen, it's amazing that the Gemara doesn't speak it out, is that since there's a possibility that you separated too little, what you do, belach, is that you always leave epis in the bottom of the cup. And again, don't forget that the whole Rabbi Yossi began that you can only use the Tanai Beis Din ad makim shahadas toya, which means we're not speaking about someone that instead of 10%, they gave 8 or 12. A little bit off. You gave a little bit off, so then Taka, when you drink something, leave something in the bottom of the cup because it's not yours. Now, I'm just saying for myself that even though it's better to be Koveya Makayim, which is what you do by Yavish, because you could, I'm curious, do we say the same thing that when you finish a box of produce, leave a little bit in the bottom of the box? Could we do? Because I am afraid that it's not mine. I don't want to be a Ganav. I didn't eat Tevel. But if this is my sedition, it's not mine. And furthermore, from the my sedition, you have to give Trumas Maisa. Even more than that. And in other words, it's my sedition that has in it Trumas Maisa. My sedition that has in it Trumas Maisa is Taka Tevel. Chai Misa B'dei Shamayim. So if I understand correctly from the Manar Fulda, even though B'yavish, you don't have an option to be Kavei Amakim. You're not Kavei Amakim, but the ultimate fear you won't have because you leave something at the end. And maybe that's like why we don't scrape our plates. I know that I was taught that way. When you eat food, don't eat the whole plate up. Leave over. We take off in the beginning. That's from liquid. That's from mayim. That's in al pi Kabbalah that the nechashim ba'akravim ruchniim, they drink off your cup. It can be possessed, or they can be in it. So when you drink a cup of water, I mean, it says if you drink out of a mayon, you have to spill out something in the beginning. But many people, they go beyond it. Whenever they pour a cup of water, they pour something else. And my teachers did it very discreetly, and you don't even notice it. They'll just jiggle the cup a little bit to the side, and they'll pour a little bit on their finger, but they'll remove. So you remove something in the beginning. We know that when you eat bread, you remove a little bit in the beginning. You don't eat the edges, right? And then you don't eat the whole thing until the end, because maybe you need it to be soymech on the Tanai basin, and some of it is not yours. But this is a gavaldic thing. And now the Gemara is going to apply the Tanai basin as the best example by, like we mentioned in the introduction, when it comes to the size of fruits, because what should a person do? They're going to take off 10 out of 100. The problem is, like we mentioned, that the mice addition is not the 10. It's not number, it's weight. 10% is weight. So let's read it inside. Let's go a little bit into Daf Mem Dal. Now the Gemara gives an example. If you have 100 figs, and let's go that the tithing figs is midrabanan. So what? You have to tithe it midrabanan. And again, we're not talking about the truma. In other words, you have now 100 figs because you already removed from the whatever you had before the approximate 2%. But now you have 100 that's dealt with truma gedolah. Now you have to take off my shine. But what happens? The Gemara says just a great application of the Tanai basin, and that's a great example of this is ad mokim shahadas toya. If chamshin are navrimin, 50 figs are large. The chamshin are dakikim, they're little. So whichever way you'll do now, ideally you'll say, okay, give 5 of this and 5 of that. Thank you. If I'll do that, even that, is it exact? But says the Gemara, in yesav min rav, if you're going to give all of the 10 from the large, then let's say what would represent 10% if the large, you're giving large for little. 50 are large and 50 are little. If you're giving all of the Ma'aser Rishon from the large, again, we're giving an approximate, but the Gemara is making the point. Then really, tzarech meisav t'sha, you should only give 9. For you not to give by approximation, for you to give exactly 10%, 9 big ones, l'chora, are 10% of the weight of the remaining 90, which is half and half. If you're going to give all 9 of them min da kikasa from the little ones, theoretically, then tzarech meisav achadesri. Then you're going to have to give 11. No, it's really like the Rashidilio is pointing out that you have the number is meya ta'enim, but what you really have is you have 10 litra. He's just giving an example. That's what you have to look. You have 10 litra. Litra is a weight, right? So then you want to give 1 litra. You have to come to the 1 litra, not more, not less. Daf Mem Dalet. However, what happens if you didn't give it that precise? You knew you have to give 10, so you gave 10. Daf Mem Dalet on the top. Nosav Asra min Rabbi, if you ended up taking up 10. So that's where we need the Tanai Beis Din. Then what will be the Tanai Beis Din? You should have given 9, right? So what is this 10th? This 10th, before the Tanai Beis Din, is Tevel. What the Tanai Beis Din does, it makes that final one part of the Chulin. Even though you separated it, so what? You're giving, in other words, what the Kohen is getting, Yakid, what the Levi is getting, he's getting Ma'aser Rishon and a gift. Huh?
How can they do it? How is it possible? It belongs to them.
How did the government take away your taxes? That is what I really want to know. This doesn't bother me that much. How did they do that? And look, when you get a paycheck, it's not you're giving it. They take it.
Very careful. We're being very careful. We're talking about the bottom of what is left in the cup, but then we're not like how what's the mahalech of Beis Din for them to say this is possible? That's my question. I'm not
I know, I understand that. So just like we say that kol ha-mekadesh adata d'Rabbanan mekadesh, what are you doing? That's what you're doing. You're making your declaration subject to Das Moshe v'Yisrael. And if they need to, they make emendations. And there are times, I know we're very careful, halacha l'maisa, to use it, that afkinu rabbanan kedushin. You know what that means? It's a guy's getting a kedushin, but he's saying, no. But what I'm doing, really, ultimately, who's going to determine exactly what I'm doing? The chachamim. And in certain circumstances, 20 years later, they're going to conclude that what I did, l'chatchila, was not kedushin. And then there's the financial part of hefker beis and hefker. The financial part is the easiest part to resolve. Because hefker beis and hefker, that's keeping the flam with vavam and beis. We have two water sources. There are 2 sources. From one source, we learned that they can be mafkia. And Beis Din has a bigger koyach. Not only can they take something out of my possession, they can depossess it from me. They can actually make it belong to you. And you made no kinyan. They can give it to you. That's the source that we find from Nachala. That Yeshua, when he was Mechalek Ha'aretz. That means he gave to this one, he gave to that one. Same thing over here. They're declaring that Istamon Chada Chulin, which is Gavaldik, not one tevel. It should be one tevel. They're saying, no, it's Chulin. It's Chulin. And now, whether I like it or not, I'm giving the Levi his share plus Chulin. V'chash loymar Shema oisa Chulin oisa trumas meiser. Now I got a problem. Let's work this through. This is so good. What's my problem? If I gave the Levi 10, but now we're discovering that since the 10 weigh a lot, so really 9 is my sedition, 1 is chulin. Levi doesn't know that. What does the Levi do? The Levi takes his 10. What does the Levi have to do? Same thing. Meiser and a meiser. Let's say he'll remove the one that's chulin for the meiser and a meiser. If the Levi were to do it, then the whole thing is messed up. Because Meiser Min HaMeiser means that from the Meiser Rishon, you give from it 10% to the Kohen, which becomes like Truma Gedoyla. But if I have 9 Meiser Rishon, 1 is Chulin. If I'm going to use that 1 Chulin as Trumas Meiser for the 9, what I did is nonsense. And the Meiser Rishon is Tevel. The fact that the Kohen gets 1 that's not in the Kedusha of Truma, that's the least problem. The problem is that the Meiser Rishon is not rectified. So v'chash loymar reflecting, no matter why are we not afraid that Shema oisa chulin oisa trumas meiser. Let's skip the words lamakamacher, and that won't be good. Why not? Because you cannot use chulin as trumas meiser. Even though the Kohen is getting whatever Hashem wants the Kohen to get, it doesn't work that way. Uksivin, it says Trumas Hashem is meiser min ha-meiser, and v'loy chulim min ha-meiser gabaldik kashem. So we have to add to the Tanai base. And what do we add to the Tanai base? And I'll tell you by heart. In the case where the guy gave 10, but really they were Ravrivin. So the Tanai base is that real 9, but the 10th is chulin. It's not the 1 is chulin. From every fruit that I separated, and don't forget that we're being kovei amakim. So we're saying that from the stem, as far down as you need, that will be meiser rishon, and the remaining in every fig, which is the excess of the 10%, is chulin. Means every fig will have within it the right proportion of meiser rishon shaloi and the chulin shaloi. There won't be 1 that's chulin. It will be b'diuk. So now that you're going to take 1 of these 10 and give it to the Kohen as Meiser Min HaMeiser, you're giving exactly 10%. Again, providing that you're giving exactly 10%. That's the answer. Amar Rabun Bar Kahana, Masna v'Omer. Many learned that Masna v'Omer doesn't have to be said. Beis Din said it. I'm relying on Beis Din. That Meiser Hazeh, Shahapedus Halal Chayavais. Whatever the Meiser Rishon, the exact that must be, Harei hu kavua. Don't forget, we have to be kovei amakim. We learned today from Rabbi Yechon. Harei hu kavua betchilas kol hakoitz v'oiketz kol oiketz v'oiketz. It begins, just as an example, it begins from the stem. Umahalach magiel b'chol asar, and it goes until you hit 10%. Gavaldik. Mesav. So now when the Levi takes 1, it has the right amount of Trumas Meiser, even though Amoida, that what the Kohen will get will also be, some of it will be Chulin. Some of it will be Chulin. I mean, if a person overgave the Meiser Rishon, at the end, the Levi will get a little bit extra as a gift. The Kohen will get a little bit extra as a gift, but the Meiser Rishon will be exact. And the Trumas Meiser will be exact. Let's stop over here. God willing to be continued.